Now here we will see how do we use the unit circle. How do we use the unit circle to find trigonometric functions? Now, the main idea here is that we're always going to talk about two things right now. We're going to talk about cosine and we're going to talk about sine. One thing to remember is that cosine, we will refer it as the x-coordinate in the unit circle, and sine, we will use it as the y-coordinate in the unit circle. Now we have not seen the unit circle yet, and that's on the next slide, but I want you to remember that when we're looking at cosine, we're going to be looking at the x-coordinate, and we're talking about sine, we're going to be looking at the y-coordinate in the unit circle, which we will see on the next slide. So in the unit circle, cosine is x, sine is y. So now, what is the unit circle? So here's the unit circle. Now, it might look like a lot of numbers. It might look a little intimidating, but this is how you run. This is how you read the unit circle. So here's your unit circle. Here is the angle of reference. So here's 30 degrees. 30 degrees have two coordinate points, -3/2 for x and 1/2 for y. Now, right now, don't pay too much attention to the radicals. We're not going to see them yet, but we will see them later on. So here's how you read it. You look at the angle of reference, and then we're going to look at the coordinate point that it has. Because look at every single angle has a terminating coordinate point. 90 degrees, 1/2. 120 has a coordinate point -1/2, comma, -3/2, and so on. Notice that every single degree has a coordinate point. So that's basically what we're going to be using right now. Now, how do we find cosine values of any angle? Well, it's pretty straightforward. Let's choose any degree. Let's choose 30 degrees. So now, how can we find the cosine of 30 degrees? Well, we're going to look at the angle of 30 degrees, which is right here. We're going to look at its coordinate point, and you got to remember that cosine is the x value. So in 30 degrees, in this coordinate point, my x value is square root of 3/2. So that means that the cosine of 30 is square root of 3/2. And that's pretty much it. This is how you find cosine values and sine values. Well, I mean, sine we're going to see them later on, but cosine, this is how you find them. Now, let's do another example. Let's try to find the cosine of 90 degrees. Okay, so what is the cosine of 90 degrees? Look at the angle. This is 90 degree. Look at the coordinate point that it has. It has the coordinate point of 0, 1. We know that for cosine, we look at the x. So the x coordinate is 0. So that means that the cosine of 90 is equal to 0. Let's do another example here. Let's look at the cosine of 210. Now, how do we find the cosine of 210? Well, first, look at the line. This is the angle of 210. This is the coordinate point of 210. Here we have the x, here we have the y value. We know that for cosine, we look at the x, which in this case, the cosine of 210 is square root of 3/2, because that is the x value for that coordinate point. Now, let's look at, on the last coordinate, let's choose a random degree. Let's look at 315. What is the cosine of 315? Well, look at the degree. It's right here. Look at its coordinate point. We have square root of 2/2, comma, negative square root of 2/2. If I want the cosine, I look at the x. So here it is. So that means that our answer is square root of 2/2. Now, what if we want to find the sine? What if we want to find the sine value? Well, let me erase this. So we're going to use it again. Now, what do we want to find the sine value? Now, the sine, we're not going to look at the x's, but we're going to look at the y coordinate points. But the idea is still the same. Now, let's find the sine of 30. So here we have 30. Well, let me write it down. What is the sine of 30 degrees? Well, here's 30 degrees. Here's its coordinate point. But for the sine, we're going to look at the y-coordinate, which is going to be 1/2. So that's it. The sine of 30, oops, it's 1/2. Let's do another one. Let's try to find the sine of 90 degrees. Let's write that down. The sine of 90. So here we have it, 90 degrees. Here's its coordinate point. I want to look at the sine. I want to look at the y-coordinate point, so that is 1. Let's do one last example here on the side. Let's try to find the sine of 225. Here's 225. Here's its coordinate point. I want the sine, so I look at the y-coordinate. Remember, it's x comma y, so here's a y-coordinate. So that means that my answer is square root 2 over 2. Negative. Last example, let's try to look at the sine of 330. So the sine of 330, here's 330. I want the sine, here's my coordinate point. I look at the y-coordinate, so that's negative 1/2. And this is how you use the unit circle to find sine and cosine values. Now there will be no entrance ticket today. It's pretty straightforward. So I'll see you in class tomorrow.